What's up, everybody? So, for a wonderful call with Lise, that was absolutely splendid. So, she's dealing with developing her company in Canada, and it's really great that she'll be able to reach out to people and offer a grief warrior program. So, huge shout out to her and the work that she's doing, and the idea is that I was able to bounce off of her while trying to develop the marketing schedule and the content cycle for the Academy project, right? And, you know, there is some interesting shit that I wanted to get up to talking about today with Trevor. And he has to go and do manual labor instead of chat magic. So, unfortunately, the live that we scheduled today isn't going to happen. But that being the case, gives me a chance to rattle off on some of the higher level intricacies of what it is that I'm talking about. So, over the last couple of days, there are the developments of this is what I'm planning, this is how it's coming out, and I want to make sure that there's a developmental process that can be followed or can be replicated that will allow us to basically be able to help out people in the war-torn countries that are either displaced because of their religion or their sexuality or whatever that they get displaced by from the community, right? Having the community displaced because of geopolitical strife, what if we changed around how the companies are structured so that the people aren't to suffer, right? That there's a way to redistribute certain types of the population that wants to go over here and do a thing, that can come over here and do a thing. And it's not the abuse and it's not the grief of the First Nations. It's not, it should never be like that. And if there was a way to do tribal society in the modern day, that's the kind of shit I'm looking for. That's the kind of thing, like, if we could do a tribal grouping based upon these people like to do this with this affinity based upon this sort of application, right? And we understand that cities should be smaller than they are, or that the regions and the infrastructure and the cause of having so many people in one space puts so much burden on that space. And so it needs to be expanded upon. It needs to be handled in a better way, where living with agricultural requirements, living with people whose professions should be to learn and to do and to develop the best of what they can be in whatever field they choose, while serving the community through the application of that thing. And that's what a business is. It's the ability to serve, right? It's the ability to walk out your path of life, your path of life, your next level of opportunity. And so as you're doing your thing, as it relates to the divine, as it relates to the spirits, and as it relates to those energies, to be able to do those rituals, to be able to get the environment going in just such a way, to be able to create a union through your meditative act and the environment that you're applying this to, it becomes very literal. And so when you're doing things like creating an evocation, you're creating a moment when you take your God, your statue, your personification, your entity, your critter, whatever it is, you're putting it on a place. And by that place, through its sigil, through its vibrations, through its colors, through its associations, and what have you, you're evoking the great spirit that moves between the relationships of this is a principle of humanity. How is it expressed in all things? How is it expressed in education? How is it expressed in economics? How is it expressed in finance? How is it expressed in publishing? How is it expressed in development of whatever the thing is? And so if you can look at that, and if you can see that, and then understanding that if we evoke the spirit that's lesser than the human life, such as that of a fly, such as that of a spider, such as that as an insect that was in the room at the time, right? By eliminating the spirits as the room at the time, the bugs, the insect life, what have you, right? We limit the amount of capacity for people to go back and use necromancy to observe the past, because there aren't those spiders, there aren't those worms, there aren't those bugs that we can use their spirits as the fly on the leaf for and project our consciousness into those animals, that insect life. And that projection through time in similar instances, through similar situations, is how you get things replicating the ancient rituals of like Kenneth Grant and what he saw when he connected to raw Horus, when he connected to the set current, when he connected to these energies that Blavatsky was also connecting to. And through the images and the art that Grant was able to write down, that Austin Spare was responsible for, to create a pictorial reference for this is that manifestation. This is that next level of and so developing things like the concept of brand consistency, of color coordinating your schedule calendar, color coordinating your marketing calendar. It could be 3 months that are black. It could be 3 months that are white. It could be 3 months that are red and purple and green and yellow and all the colors, all the seasonal cycles, right? And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to lay that out by the end of this week. And so that way, starting next week, I can look into getting a graphic designer and, you know, to take this up to the next level, see who's interested in what. And we get that 3-month school cycle built out. That way, the more infrastructure that we get, the better off the program is, the easier things roll into one. And I've got a 4-month plan of 3 months each. Right. So in 4 months, we can met out the classes that start here, the classes that start there, and the classes that start there. And we just keep repeating that cycle. So that way each class gains with those that are at experience level, that are having experience and results, and those that have completed already stage 1 of the workshop or stage 2 of the workshop. And the stage 1 and the stage 3 people meet with the stage 2 people. And that's the framework that I got from learning with the bartending school I trained at. They ran a 3-month training program, and it was $6,000 for 3 months. And they had the physical campus, but you could supplement it through FAFSA. And that was, that got expensive. It was like a $15,000 payment by the time I was done paying off the FAFSA thing. So wasn't happy about that, but the way to make it economical is to scale it rapidly. And that's why I'm thinking in terms of scale for this, is because I don't want to charge a lot of money for my program. I want to create a lot of money from the program. So what I implement now, what I implement here for this, is to push further into economic redevelopment projects, is to nuance the shit out of advertising cycles to line it up to the astrological colors. Because if you look at What would it take to be a fly on the wall in a situation, in a conversation, right? Where you could glean something in some capacity, right? So what do you talk about in a niche environment? Are you talking about raising up spirits? Are you talking about the soil consistency for growing the proper amount of weed? Are you talking about farming consistencies? And by going through, and it's not just about these consistencies, but it's about the relationship that exists between them, and at the higher levels in the applications of them, we have the opportunity to develop something that's even more robust than before. We have something that is the development of the divine that we get to be in the room with, right? If we replicate our business structure into the same discipline as that God form. Follow me? So, if, for example, you have people that work with Hades, necromancers, people that work with spirits and grief and grieving, need to have healthy outlets in professions that are adaptable to those with alternate spiritual beliefs, right? And so being aware of people like Lise and what she's doing and how she's doing it is super important. And to be able to be there with people like Paul who want to connect to the high magic stuff better, to people like Trevor who have been in the life forever, you know? And you've got people like Mike who's in the life but needs some help right now, right? And making everything lead from one step to the next step in a positive way that makes it so that how do we serve and how we service is when you're ready to spend money on the infrastructure and on the programs. Like when you're ready to come to the academy, right? I want you to be ready because you know it's this conversation, and to be included in this conversation that you want to be able to think like. You want to be able to think about, okay, well, what is the relationship by thinking about when I evoke this divinity, what is it going to do in my life? What am I doing that's related to the reasons why that influence would be in my life in the first place? So if I'm looking to contact the spirit of the fly that was on the wall when one of the pharaohs was doing one of the things with one of their court people, right? And you connect to the animal mind, the bestial mind, the non-human insect mind, right? And the connective web of all of those things. If you had the king spirit of the fly or the spider or whatever animal, critter, whatever it was that was present in the story, you look through its eyes, you compel its spirit to respond to your mind so that it can walk the web between another way of life, so you can see how another way of life lives and experiences and expresses itself. So that if you, by understanding that on a conceptual level, will also be able to influence society on the same level. That the same pattern of obligation that you understand what was going on in that room, in that moment for your entertainment, because you wanted to see what would happen if, well, what would happen then or when, after you have gone back and you've possessed the spirit of the fly. Your consciousness is now the fly. What are you doing in that period? You are making the fly behave like a fly. You're allowing its instinct to take over. It is no longer itself. Now it is the you fly. Right? You catching my meaning? Because your ritual made you vibrate so much that you were able to project your consciousness into the emissary that has been granted to you by the spirit of the fly, right? It lets you into the fly in the right moment, in the right space, because you were able to, in your ritual, get your energy focused there. And so you can psychically see, you can psychically intuit what was going on. If you're using a medium like a brass mirror or a bronze mirror or a golden mirror or whatever it is, you're using these things and you're getting to such a higher level of application that everything you do mets out the responsibility you have to determine this ladder of engagement per every level of life. And so by being able to look at that and by being able to say, okay, well, this is the pattern of life that I want to go on because this is the God that I serve, well, then maybe I should look at the different types of employment possibilities that exist within the realm of this job, of this marketplace, of this activity. And so by going through and having a program that you gain engagement with in the same way that Lise is walking out her connection to the medicine wheel and to her ancestors to be able to help people through their grief and through their grieving, which is an experience she felt herself in mass. So you have a pattern, you have a principle, you have a thing. And if you can go through and you can deal with what would happen if you summoned up the fly that was in the room when a god was speaking, or when a god was having sex, or when some priest was having a conversation that determined the fate of some empire or what have you, right? Small rooms, right? What else is in the small room? What other forms of life? Well, if you can't get into the room because you don't know, are you asking the spirit of the brick that was there to be in the room again, to allow you to pass through its gateway into the intermediary of the room that you were in so that you can learn from that moment, so that you can go back and see, I wonder what would happen if I was able to evoke the world in the way that I need to in order to be able to reflect upon all of the myriad potential opportunities that could exist as a result of that moment being changed. And if that moment could be changed, if that moment could be modified, if that moment could be interacted with, because that moment's come again, or because that moment that I'm trying to manipulate here, what was done in the situation when the situation that was describing the spirit's purpose was experienced. So when you're trying to figure out how to be a romantic partner and you're looking at the spirit of the fly on the room, what would the ladies be saying? That's grimoire magic. You want to be the fly on the wall in the conversation in the room where ladies were. Right? So you have to project your consciousness into the spirit of the fly so you can interpret what these women were saying. Is one way to look at the grimoire tradition. Right? But if you can think in that many layered approach, it's a literal expression of the patterning of thought that you have to, well, if I have to think about the coloring and the solution and the application and the development and the interactions between and the cultivations between, this is the same kind of shit that business owners think about regularly. So practicing shit in the grimoires understands that you have to have certain levels of education. You have to be concerned about certain levels of things in society in order to be able to get certain results from them. That look like serve that spirit in mass. Are you running hospitals? Are you running funeral homes? Are you running, other types of industry, because you understand that you support goes to the people that harvest the trees for the wood that you use to build, for the places that the animals come from that you eat, the places where the agriculture that you eat comes from, so that at every single step of the way, you've got something that's anchored in the past that's a need that's being brought forward because you're consuming its spirit, and you're creating this constant flow of return to build out the world again, to rebuild the world in many cases. And so how do we get that discussion going across religion, across politics, so that everybody winds up participating, and they do it as a standard of their education practice, right? Your introduction, your middle, and your advanced. That's how all books go. Or some books only focus on the intermediate, or only some books focus on the beginner, or only some folks focus on the advanced. And at every stage in between, you have a thread that connects from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And so understanding the rituals and understanding why it's important you think about these things, because it extends into being able to see, okay, all my advertising for the month of June will match these colors because it's the auspices of June. This is what they've been ascribed to in the past. Why should I not use this color information, right? In fact, that will be the standard by which I do it, right? And so every month for each of the 12 will have that color. And so for every application of the rotation cycle based on my marketing, for what I'm the 4 weeks and the cycle of 4 weeks and what drops off in what I talk about. So that way, week 1, they're talking about all 4 classes. In week 2, they're talking about 3 classes. And the 4th one that starts a month after that. It's setting up trees, it's setting up patterns, it's setting up spreadsheets. Because if you can think about a moment so perfectly that when you are interacting with the divine thought, to be able to expand outwards into the world around you, to manipulate the world in accordance with the divine principles, right? Everything you do in tangible action is then reflected by the tangible understanding of that action. What would happen if you were there witnessing this act? Right? What would you then do if you were witness to that act? And by witnessing that act, by being put in the moment with that action, how can you use this moment moving forward so that way, as you develop, you now have a familiarity with this behavior. And so this way you can identify that behavior and you can say, oh, this is like to this. And so this is why the study of cultures is important. The studies of traditional magic is important, is because it's the traditional ways that you understand the flow of fate over here and the flow of fate over here. And so if you can understand that they move and they behave in different ways over here, well, these people are talking about a red current, right? They're talking about the Spider Queen. That's Michael Bertaux's Gnostic Voodoo. Like, that's what my buddy Hugh goes all in on, is like all of that. Whereas like traditional Voodoo, traditional Palo, traditional studies in the folk traditions, that's Keith, that's his thing, right? And mine's the interplay between. Mine's what happens when the spirits communicate back and forth, right? What are the spirits over here saying to the spirits that are over here saying? Both are getting insane manifestation, right? And they're obeying certain principles that are the same, but they don't acknowledge that they're the same because they acknowledge that it's the identification of a subset of energy made in a specific way over here. And so categorizing that, keeping those things separate but aligned, so that way they run to be the same kind of thing that occurs at the same time of year, right? And this is just by similarity. This is by similarity of expression, right? And so with that energy, as it aligns throughout the year, if you look at that through a lens for how does your content get created throughout a year? How does your expression of personal development occur throughout a year? What are the holes that people are missing that you can provide a solution for? And so it's in this solution, it's in this cultivation that I use the principles of high magic both figuratively and ritualistically, right? Figuratively, in that it gets me to look at the through line of energy when I look at a table because I'm not just looking at it in one way. I've gotten trained to look at it in 8 or 9 ways because of the energies that go into the source material, right? And so if you can start looking at things in these multi-layer patterns, what patterns are going to be similar that you want to have line up, so that way one action you do that day matches to your cycle or your sequence, so that way it carries through and you maintain consistency of operation, and you've got something you can plan. You've got something you can take to a graphic designer and say, hey, look, I want this, and it'll match everything you're doing as a result. Because of your work, it invites these. So it's just the connection of these things. And it's the development. And it's the development of these things and the cultivation from these things that makes it beautiful and elegant. But anyway, thank you, my friends. I will see you tomorrow for the spell of the day. I hope you remember, don't be evil.